Welcome everybody. It's great to see so many people here for this event. I'm Jenny Lomax, the director at Camden Arts Centre, and we're really delighted to be showing Bonnie Camplin's work here, alongside, of course, Matt Mulligan. And tonight, I think it's the first of a series of talks that we're getting that look at some of the ideas that come out of your head across the show. So we're with Bonnie tonight. We've got Dr. David Luke and Michele Occelli, and they're three of them that Gina's put here as a trialogue. You think trialogue? We'll be looking at altered states of consciousness and exceptional human experience, thinking about how perception and reality fold in and out of one another, specifically through science and somatics and sanity. Sorry, I'm having to read this because, as you will gather over the course of the evening, that Bonnie has her own language for things. Sanity, cybernetics, and neuro-linguistic programming. So you're in for a great conversation.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So I'm sure that none of you really need an introduction from to the audience, because I'm sure you all know it, but Bonnie, as you know, is an artist. She was nominated for the Turner Prize 2014 for the presentation at South London Gallery as part of the Anxiety Arts Festival, and was also shown here previously at Camden Arts Centre as part of a exhibition curated by Steve Claydon. Strange Events permit themselves the luxury of occurring, and anybody that saw that exhibition will I think get an idea of how Bonnie thinks and how personal it was to be in that show. David is Senior Lecturer in Psychology at the University of Greenwich, and he teaches on the undergraduate course on the psychology of exceptional human experience. I'm really sorry to be missing this, I tell you. And Michele is a hypnotherapy practitioner who uses a combination of Ericksonian and ideodynamic techniques to enable processes of change and self-discovery. Is that right?
That's right.
It's going to be a fabulous talk, I know it is, and I'm going to please ask you if you would turn your mobile phones off, because it's being live broadcast and rotated, and there will be time at the end, I think, for questions. And so, do enjoy the talk, and thank you all three for coming, and I'm sorry if I got any of the terminology wrong. You don't need these,
Not at all.
do you?
We've
Okay,
got
thank you very much.
observe.
Putting in red. Corn syrup dyed red. Now we're going to put in corn syrup dyed green. Now we're putting in blue corn syrup. All right, now we're going to rotate these fairly slowly 5 times. Is this one?
That's one.
Notice the flow is laminar because the Reynolds number is less than 1. Is this 2?
This will be 3.
This is 3. 4, 5. Now we're going to go back.
Yes.
Backwards 1. Backwards 2. Backwards 3. Backwards 4. Backwards.
You need to go half a row. Well, keep going.
Oh, I see.
Go one more. One more.
It's a good thing we have a couple of coaches here. Very good.
So, got very fascinated with that event because to me, it's not just a metaphor, it's a clue as to the sort of mechanics of how things, ideas, concepts are coded or bound into psyche. So I wanted to start with it because we have all sorts of vocabularies in play and all sorts of words, as Jenny said. I am a bit of a divergent thinker, and I'm with two people that are also quite divergent, but in what connects us all is we're all into psyche and psychology and mind and ways into and out of dimensions. I have these preoccupations with the forms that are the sort of mechanics of how information is transmitted and how information moves around in ways that are non-linear cause and effect ways. How is it that non-human entities can form like eddies in a river and sort of affect everything despite people's best efforts at measuring, controlling, regulating life and technologizing life and this all-pervading metaphor of the world as a machine. So we could go all over the place, but we have been trying for the last 2 hours to sort of try to get focused. And so that form, for example, really made me think of how a moment is bound into and coded as a memory. I was reading Korzybski, who is Robert Anton Wilson, some of you are familiar with, always going on about semantics and the syntactical nature of reality, and how the story told, structured in very specific ways, can inhibit or open up possibilities in terms of where the mind is allowed to go or where it isn't allowed to go. Yeah. So that's my interest in the syntactical nature of reality. Korzybski's whole thing, he was writing in the 30s. He was part of this thing called the Institute of General Semantics. And what I've always been calling the 0-point awareness, he called it the unspeakable moment, the silent, objective moment of observation before abstraction occurs. I hope you're following me so far. But anyway, so I'm really interested in sort of electrochemical principles at work in semantics, semiotics, and the body, and how it all. And I really think that there's these key forms, and one of them is vortex geometry and the physics of plasma. But anyway, so we were talking around all of these things, and David, there's two things we really need to touch on before we go anywhere else. One of them is what you were telling me about your friend who's a geneticist.
Mm-hmm.
He was talking about how previously we had this neo-Darwinist sort of model of genes as these little independent things, and they are the cause of tallness or, you know, intelligence or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Very crude sort of way of seeing, but your friend was telling you about a much more field-like,
Yes.
wave-like behaviour in how genes are switched on and off.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so hold that thought, and then we have to talk about this businessman called Elon Musk, who is putting billions of dollars into proving that the world is a simulation, and he's got all these hackers hacking, trying to discover the code so that they can sort of change it or something.
Trying to hack the matrix of reality.
Yeah. So please talk about your friend the geneticist
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how information moves and behaves in ways that are not linear cause and effect.
I mean, I'm not entirely sure because I'm not a geneticist myself, but what he was telling me over a coffee with dazzly eyes was that as he was trying to work within the spectrum of their theory, to switch on and switch off certain genes and see how the switching on and off then gets transmitted through RNA transcriptase back into biological form. And as he was observing the phenomenon of switching on and switching off and then seeing how this thing then gets trickled down as information until it becomes something that you can touch, he noticed that actually as you switch something on and off, a series of other genes become sort of, they kind of, you know, they listen to this and they respond. They kind of get spirited, and they also switch on, or they also switch off. And the way he described it was that he saw, I mean, in his own, I guess, inner imagination, a kind of wave-like, a ripple-like movement in the genome, you know, which of course is something that probably he can't express fully in scientific terms, but immediately reminds you of all the other wave-like ripples that you can think of in every other realm of, you know, from traditional philosophies and so on. Which I guess brings us to this idea of the linear thinking of someone like Elon Musk, you know, the idea that there is a system and you can crack it, which in a way denies some of that aspect of the wave and the movement and the kind of concerted resonance of things, because it transforms it into a, you know, in a kind of alphabet, which is a bit more mechanicistic, I guess. If that makes sense.
Ties in quite a lot as well with your next speaker. Next week is Rupert Sheldrake as well, and this idea of morphic resonance. You know, there seems to be some kind of resonance going on between these kind of epigenetic codes and what you're talking about. And I mean, his whole theory was born, he'd tell you a better version of it next week if you want to come and listen to it, but it was born out of the problem of morphogenesis, how kind of things, organisms develop their particular shape given a very limited kind of number of genes for coding that. And how that there are these kind of fields of information which kind of pass on the general idea for a shape of things, which is encoded in the DNA and beyond the epigenetics as well. And maybe there is some kind of resonance with his ideas there of these morphic fields and the idea that you have these epigenetic triggers kind of somehow kind of singing in synchrony. I don't know if is everyone familiar with the idea of morphic resonance, like the idea that there's some kind of like information or consciousness itself is kind of stored beyond the brain and it kind of transcends space and time in that, but things that have become similar in nature or things that have happened before resonate stronger when those kind of events arise again in the future. So humans have their particular form because we kind of resonate with all the other previous humans that have been before us. And so we kind of develop these kind of similar forms. And it extends over to the kind of the structure of crystals. New crystals will form in one lab, and then in another lab, the other side of the world, they will also form in a similar way, kind of have similar properties, but they're not yet kind of set until that one crystal has been formed. So the kind of the originator of a particular structure or event or thing resonates with all later things of that kind, basically. And it's a fairly abstract idea, but it does kind of tend to go a bit beyond the kind of standard linear causal kind of models we have of reality.
I guess it's pointing to the fact that there's a conscious form. The form itself is conscious. It's not just a byproduct of necessity, no?
Yeah, it's not a functionalist.
It's not a functionalist.
Sort of reading. But he tells the story that really makes me giggle. It's the story of the sheep doing commando rolls over the... well, he tells first the story of all the... It's out in Wales, actually.
Oh, great.
Yeah. The horses, he says, it's talking about how information can be transmitted through qualities or qualia, shared qualia. Qualia being the experience of the blueness of blue or the experience of the greenness of green, say, for example. So he's talking about, you know, things can form and leak through that channel, or in fact any channel, any sort of analog that you can think of can be a potential exit or entry or transmission of awareness. I hope I'm making sense. But he tells the story of that before barbed wire was invented, horses were unafraid of barbed wire. And when it first was invented in the 30s or whenever, horses were just running into it because they had no memory or model for barbed wire. But he says somehow, after about 10, 20 years, all horses all over the world are scared of barbed wire. And how was that transmitted when horses don't use phones? You know, how did they know? It's kind of, and his thing is, it was transmitted through the quality of horse, just species. It was transmitted through that analog. And so that's just one example of thinking about how things can form through information in ways that...
There's a kind of accumulation of wisdom. Somatically, the body accumulates wisdom.
Yeah.
It doesn't go entropically. It doesn't become more retarded.
Yeah.
If it's kind of led to learning, it actually becomes wiser.
Yeah.
Which I guess that's another way to put it.
Yeah. Your word wisdom was learning in ways that are not accumulated in that sense. But so and the same thing with the sheep learning and with the sheep dips, and they all were learning how to do. They were commando rolling over the cattle grids.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So just by virtue of being sheep, you know. So
these Welsh sheep.
no, just all sheep.
Sheep everywhere.
Sheep everywhere. Yeah. It was David who suggested to me to read Evan Spence's The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries. Is that the correct title?
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah, and the key thing in that, this is Evan Spence going around in the 20s or turn of the century, any sort of remaining pagan faith across that sort of Celtic swathe of the British Isles, going around and listening to the sort of vocabulary and the semantics of their faith and how they sort of understood how is it possible that a fairy can affect our lives, and what is a fairy. Anyway, one of the first things he says that a fairy can take any form, and that really struck me because I was thinking of fairy as just an entity, that could be any kind of blob or grub or shape that just seeks to survive, wants to survive, and feeds on whatever it needs to feed on to grow. And that could be just this shape-shifting kind of mass that can just affect any moment. And that links in with archons, which is this Gnostic thing of this kind of virus. It's like an alien psychic virus that pervades, and the way to remove it is with exercises and clearing it. Anyway,
can I just jump in
I've
there?
already digressed.
Because
Yes.
it's interesting you brought that up about the structure of elves. I had an email today from Charles Tart, who's a kind of fairly famous parapsychologist, transpersonal psychologist. And he was talking about brownies and how he had an experience, kind of confess, on this kind of scientific forum, which is usually very kind of rigorous scientific experimental discussions, and he just kind of brought up this story of how he encountered a brownie. It was this kind of particular type of little person, and he was kind of wearing this kind of classic 18th century dress. And then he later had a conversation with a guy who's a scholar of alchemy, and saying how the alchemists were the last people working with brownies, that they kind of engendered them and worked with them in their work, and that all kind of finished in about the 18th century. And so this kind of brownie, this kind of little person, this entity, appeared to him wearing that kind of particular clothing of that era. So maybe you got stuck there with the alchemists, but essentially it kind of, whatever the brownie is itself, it was kind of dressed in the guise of the era to which it belonged.
Which was the era again?
The 18th century.
So it's almost as if the morphic field of the brownie kind of stopped adapting at that point. There was no more need for form to come, I guess.
I've seen one of these.
18th century dress?
Yeah, at the end of my bed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's
so,
hear about that.
Yeah, well, because anyway, we were connecting up this, trying to connect up this story with Elon Musk, who is this businessman putting billions into. Please tell me that story, and I'll tell you what it was.
Well, he's a billionaire businessman, kind of eco cars and eco things. One of the richest men on the planet currently, and him and other billionaire philanthropists have been secretly putting money into Silicon Valley and hiring tech guys and hackers based on the belief that there is some mathematics which would demonstrate that we're almost certainly living in a computer simulation or a computer program, not a simulation, of reality. And that this is being kind of, this program's been written by some kind of higher order beings, but we're not actually real, we're just kind of acting out this kind of matrix-like existence. So it's secretly hiring all these kind of hackers to kind of somehow break the code and hack reality and work out, find the glitch in the matrix that's going to, I don't know, presumably make him more money. I don't know what it's going to do. It's going to be the one who wants the kind of burgers and his memory erasing or whatever it is.
So does he see it as a cube?
I don't know.
Or a grid?
He might do, I don't know. I haven't got that far in my investigations.
Because, yeah.
But that ties in with the Gnostic thing,
Oh,
doesn't
yeah,
it?
and the Gnostic.
The
And then
0 point.
that made me think about,
And the 0 point.
0 point. And that made me think about this 2 stories that I heard from 2 separate sources about these Silicon Valley Google millionaires and programmers who are at Burning Man Festival. They have their own enclaves where they have armed guards and luxury sort of tents, and they're doing ayahuasca inside these tents, like as part of their research. And somebody said, when I told this to someone, they said, "Oh my God, it's nothing sacred." That they've reached into this sacred sort of medicine and they're polluting it. And I just thought, what about if it's just that entity reaching out to them to let them know what they need to know?
Yeah.
so that was obviously me being sort of optimistic or something. But yeah, but then I actually had a meeting with a student who was a vegan, and she had a pile of gelatin, and she said, "Oh, I'm interested in like mortality. I'm a vegan because like it's horrible what we're doing to animals." And anyway, I bought all this gelatin. And I said, "You're wearing dungarees, I think you're a bacteria farmer. And what's driving this?" And then we had this sort of weird conversation about the whole ontology of who's the author of her work, and whether it was virus collusion, takeover, you know, just driving this little person to just make more viruses and just breed more viruses and bacteria. Anyway. So the 0 point. See, you keep bringing me back to 0 point.
We have a message for Elon Musk.
Yeah, so if you were to meet Elon Musk, what would you tell him about 0 point, and what does that say about his big gigantic machine metaphor?
Well, I guess the idea of trying to crack the code is redundant. I mean, first of all, by trying to crack the code, you're kind of institutionalizing the code. You're making it, you're making it a cathedral. So you're fixing it, and the whole idea is that, in a way, you're fixing it, and so you're creating a disease, which is a fixation of dynamics that would otherwise work in a kind of homeostasis. So, I mean,
we were saying
we're
it's
adapting.
a form of idolatry.
It's a form of idolatry.
Because
I mean,
it's
it's
sort
like
of worshipping at this
absolutely.
thing which he believes to be fixed.
It's like worshipping Moloch or something. And at the same time, the code is already cracked because there is the 0 point, which is just what you're using in terms of language, but it just means there are experiences, there are technologies, there are moments where you can somehow avert yourself from the rules of consensus reality, and people have done it for since humanity exists. So he's just using an externalized machine to achieve what you can achieve internally. Because I guess if you use an externalized machine, it kind of goes against your own inherent fear of the ephemeral and the impermanent. If you do it internally, you have to deal with ever-changing forms. You're dancing and you have to keep on moving. If you create an externalized machine, and you're creating another cathedral to crack the cathedral. So you have another way of feeling, ooh, I'm okay because I'm still in the cathedral.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not kind of, swirling away.
Yeah.
I think it is
Does that make sense?
this kind of fear of ephemerality as well, because a part of it is based on the idea, this extropian dream. Extropianism is the idea that you can download your consciousness onto a computer, into tech, basically, kind of transfer it from wetware to kind of hardware. And that the extropian dream is that we will then kind of exist eternally on the internet, and we won't need our bodies anymore. But I think that is a kind of a fear of ephemerality. It's just kind of this kind of transhumanist kind of wet dream of evading death in a way. But it's kind of based on a really shaky premise, I think, which is that consciousness is essentially reducible to digital code.
Yes. And also in a way it's self-defying again.
Big guess.
Because you're starting from a desire to be immortal, but once you become immortal, the desire is no longer valid because you become Buddha. So you're no longer desiring anything. So you just neutralize your entity as a human, and you become a fucking program.
Yeah.
It could just be that he's clever enough to instigate projects that he knows will get reasonably smart people to invest their brains in, because the Matrix is something that anybody who grew up in the last 20 years in some way would like to believe is a kind of documentary.
Yeah.
Because he's also got other projects like going to live on Mars and his space travel projects, which he probably understands aren't achievable, but they're all things which will drag technologies that he wants people to work in forward, and he will reap the benefits of any discoveries that are made. I think it's enough that in some senses, for some people, reality is in that form. It is almost like a matrix. It's a matrix of information, and that's what they live by.
But there's also a fear. I mean, in all of this super abstract information-based thing, there's also a fear of dirt. You know what I mean? There's a fear of
dirt.
this stinks. This is not just information. I mean, it is also information, but there's an entropy that is going beyond what you can just codify.
Wet dirt.
Yes, or dark dirt.
Dark dirt.
You know what I mean? Because in the end, it's a little bit of a kind of European genealogy of going towards, you know, the abstract, which is the clean, white, shiny paradise where everything, you know, everybody's like got white teeth and,
it's like the
and
difference
hair
between
don't fall and
Western kind of mysticism, which is kind of this transcendent idea of, you know, kind of escaping the material realm and getting up to the heavens, or the more kind of imminent, shamanic, down and dirty,
exactly.
roll up your sleeves and get your wellies on, stomping around in the mud kind of transcendence, but just mystical connection. Same, really.
Yeah.
He's going to sue you, by the way.
Well, Kurzweil, you know, you're now making me think of the Brain Initiative, which is all Kurzweil, you know, Ray Kurzweil, the transhumanist small man sort of kind of guy who wants to reanimate his father. He wants to put machines in flowers, and he's an abject character. He works for both DARPA and Google.
Wow.
And DARPA and Google are actually the same thing now.
Yep.
Just in case you were wondering, the Defense Research Program of America, DARPA. So they're putting billions, Europe and America putting billions into this thing called the Brain Project. Which is, again, all born out of cybernetics and neuromechanical kind of research into basically mind control, you know, how to sort of capture mental territory. And it's another reason that I'm obsessed with, liquid crystals, because I knew that AI systems were going to be using liquid crystals for doing their computations. And then I found out, they are. And so they understand all about the electrocolloidal kind of mechanisms and how information behaves. And it's like, anyway, gone off and think.
They're like a Sheldrake confirmation. They're using a kind of Sheldrake approach.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think at the highest levels of MIC, they are employing all the weirdest and wonderfulest new paradigms and vocabularies. In fact, the higher you go, the more metaphorical it gets. You know, and they do sit there in these sort of powwows, riffing on kind of poetic, you know, languages. How do I know that? Because I see things. The Brain Project, all about mind control and mind capture, and with this sort of the control fairy. I call it the control fairy. And I, in my mind, see the control fairy as an archon, and it feeds on, it sort of feeds on the need to control and that fulfillment.
Is this why you're using this illustration of the cats with a vivisection? Is this like a primitive version of this, like an attempt at that, but in a kind of more analogic form, or is something else?
Well, that was just cats showing me ways out. What was that?
As they do.
Yeah, well, they do, if you're listening.
The 0 point meow.
Yeah, you know, I mean, that's just some information that I got from a cat, via cat channel, from future cats. I don't care if you don't believe me. You know, I could frame it as I imagined that it was as though it was, you know, but that would be a secular way of framing it, or something.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
That's what I'd say.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that was another thing. He's a scientist. So because David is a scientist, he has to be extremely careful about the language he uses.
I only say
Don't want to put you on the
I
spot.
seemingly imagined the future cats telling me all of this.
Yeah.
There you go. I said it. There you
Yeah, it was as though, Should we open it up to questions? Because we're all over the place anyway.
Obviously, sorry. I don't know what to say first.
Yeah.
Things. I guess a really pragmatic thing, which maybe doesn't feel important, but might be useful in like what fiction we might be living in is, I guess, because people kept talking about the Matrix, but obviously it's Neuromancer, which is where the Wachowski sisters got the Matrix from, and like this Elon Musk is literally the same, is big and in Neuromancer, and that whole, so the text was shifted into the film, but that text is about big business and is about a man who's like this big rich man who can live forever and like finds a way to hide it. So just as like if you want a practical guide to the present, that's probably the one. And it's kind of, I guess what I would be interested in is, so say he's trying to like get out of, or maybe not get out, but I guess assume that you can control something from the outside. That's why you'd want to get out of it, right? But I wonder if there's any like revolutionary possibilities for escaping the Matrix that you could think of.
It's a very, I mean, the whole thing actually is a very early Christian preoccupation, no?
Yes.
With like basically a crackable reality, and there's an outside entity that you can access, or you have more, you're kind of in the room with the king rather than with the imposter, I guess.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, no? I mean,
Yeah.
it comes down to this.
If you could get out of this grid reality, what would you do?
Well, that is semantically prejudicial, I would say, because you said this grid, and this is like that assumes that we're all in the same grid, And when we're close with people, we can say this, this, we know what we mean by this shit reality or whatever, But then, I mean, I say listen to your cat, with your mind. You know what I mean? Because they have answers. Just if you're paying attention,
Well, learn to communicate. I think that's what I've learned from my house pet. That if I'm thinking something and my cat does something, it also happens to be a reincarnation of my dead father as well, which is kind of handy. According to a psychic, I mean, I don't buy into these things, but he's operating in a different sphere, and so if something's going on for me and he's reacting, I think, okay, thanks.
Yeah. And he doesn't necessarily have a verbal form yet. No.
It sometimes scratches me. And we're born to be in this grid. We'll get off it when we die. I think the most revolutionary act, if you're unhappy with this grid, is learn to love yourself. That's the only way, really. Because, it's like the whole John Lash thing. He got really, really high, and one day this being came to him and said, "You'll get to this when you're dead. You're born to be alive. You're not born to be in this grid."
All right. Okay. Does anyone think the grid is like a different shape than a cube? A which? A blob.
A blob.
I think for a human with a human mind, the interaction you have with reality is illusory. So, for example, if you're looking at a computer screen and you see a little blue rectangle that looks like a folder, you think that's a folder full of your accounts, but it's not. But you believe it is, because it's convenient. And that's the way everything that makes up a reality for a human exists.
Actually, I disagree. I mean, I understand where you're getting at, but first of all, I think illusory within Western understanding is a very laden term. And I think in other traditional understanding, the idea of illusory is not that it's not there, it's just it's not the ultimate reality, which means it's still real, and it's objectively illusory.
It's a way of relating to what's real. It's a way of having a relationship to what you could say is there. When I say illusory, I mean it's based on series and levels and systems of illusion that are illusory in nature. I don't mean it doesn't exist.
Okay, yes. At the same time, it's the keyhole.
It's the only key we have.
That's what I'm saying.
But it's a key to understanding what your brain is.
Exactly, and it's
And if
essential.
you understand that, then you won't have to worry about being stuck in a matrix, because you actually understand what's going on.
But also you need to be stuck in a matrix. As in, if you're not stuck in a matrix, as you're not. So you need the matrix. I mean, you need to have a ruled reality. I'm sitting here, I can't sit on the ceiling. I cannot eat with my ass and shit with my mouth. Okay? They're very, very, these are not just like, illusory or, metaphorical. They are rules. The rules are there because they allow you to, through the rules you go, yes, exactly. And through that you can go for a genealogy of subsuming the rules into different forms until you get to a point where perhaps you can sit on the ceiling.
Yeah.
So they're giving you the cueing to how to get to other places, in a way.
Yeah.
It's like a little map.
Well, which brings me back to Robert Anton Wilson and Korzybski. The whole Korzybski thing is the map is not the territory.
Yep.
And we do have a sort of a tendency, even a sort of conditioned pathology, to identify with the map and worship it and idolatize it and forget that it's not the territory, and the territory is a shapeshifter, and that's why I like the 0 point, because you just sort of remember this principle of the 0 point.
It also makes a hole in the map.
Yes, precisely.
So you get out of it.
It's your little briefer hole.
Yeah.
I try, yeah, no, well, because I don't want to sort of, so, basically it's a point of awareness which can move around through information, and it's the objective, unspeakable moment within all, the moment that contains all moments. So you can use other, they could call it potentia, or there's a lot of nice fancy sort of 21st century words that you can use, but it just, say for example in logic, it's the point, it's the peaceful, maybe it's the happy place, it's the silent place of knowing, noesis, huh?
Well, T.S. Eliot says the still point of the turning world,
The
which is
still
actually
point
very
of
good.
the turning world.
So it's where you see that everything is moving, but you see it from a kind of infinitely still, present. So it's in every tradition, in every practice, it's just there.
Yeah.
And we get into it all the time. I mean, that's the question. You don't need to create you don't need to spend all those billions. You just zonk out every day, 15 times a day. You don't even realize it. They're like micro moments where you interrupt the flow of things and you go somewhere else. And then you can expand them or you can just disregard them.
Yeah.
There's actually a few issues that I wanted to ask about or mention about. One of them is, in context of the morphic field, how can I understand, I can't really find the exact words, the proper words, but how can I approach now the future of the power of ayahuasca? because for the last few years or for last decade, it's the use of it has been quite abusive, and the plant has been cut, for example, much earlier, or the oldest trees, the oldest bushes or parts were cut off, which should not be cut off, or the very young one was used instead of very old one. So it is desecrated. So I was wondering, what do you think about the plant's consciousness, like the?
I think there is a danger in commodification of ayahuasca and its use, and I mean traditionally it belongs to your Amazonian basin indigenous people and their use of it, but their use of it was kind of pretty much waning and dying out in some respects if you listen to some of the older anthropologists, and it has been reinvigorated, and it could be that it may be really useful at this time on the planet for a lot of people to be engaging with ayahuasca, but then at the same time it's kind of a victim of that success or use as a tool, in that it is becoming commodified, and then all the kind of modern 21st century ills and problems of just using things and just kind of treating everything like resources and depleting them. So I mean, I just hope that people kind of learn to engage with it in a kind of more ecologically minded manner faster than we kind of annihilate it. I don't think it's any danger of becoming extinct, but there's certainly problems with it being the older kind of plants being massively over-harvested. So clearly that's a kind of human problem.
Yeah, I didn't mean the extinction of it, but rather it's losing it. No, it's retaining the experiences that it's been going through, and it having an influence on its power, on its future power, on its future.
But it's not only a passive entity.
Reality, hey?
It's not only a passive entity; it's a conscious entity. So therefore, as much as it absorbs experience, it surely processes the experiences and perhaps has a will to, let's put it in very crude terms, to progress through that process. And actually I was thinking about something that is interesting. I don't know in which tradition this is, but where they put the bottle of ayahuasca, they also put a glass of water, because some old ayahuasqueros say that at some point, of course, the plant might just die. There might be climate change, you can't grow the bloody wine. But the idea is that every time you're doing a ceremony, you put a glass of water, because eventually the same information that is contained in the plant might be contained into the water. And I think that's extraordinary, because that's a kind of like intuitive, morphic field, Sheldrick thing done by someone who was probably an illiterate guy who was cutting pieces of things in a jungle. So it's quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
And it makes sense.
Well, all water is in communication with all water all the time. So that's another thing about water and, plants being water-based, entities, is that there's a clue there to how we have this sort of that shared resonance. Yeah. But
And itself, DMT is a configuration of information, and water reflects in a way, even just on a metaphorical level. You can you can dip the face of DMT in the water, just like you dip the moon, and then you can drink it. Probably that's the kind of aim.
Yeah.
To make it present.
Well, the thing going on about brains being liquid crystals, it's to do with the fact that when water tends to a surface, it enters a different state called the fourth phase of water, which is the liquid crystal state, which is here on the edge, on the meniscus. And that is where everything becomes structured and hexagonal. Exactly. And I haven't had time to go down that path, but there is something in the DMT molecule, the shape of the DMT molecule, the shape of the hexagonal liquid crystal. There's something in there to do with what happens there. But I get very superstitious about publishing things when I think, because I do get paranoid in a Philip K. Dick style, about these things being taken and used by you know.
The evil.
The evil ones.
But if morphic resonance is true, then it's already out there. As soon as you're
know,
sure of it,
yeah,
you know, it's kind of available to anyone.
Yeah.
You've let the genie
But
out the bottle.
I coded it. I did code it. We coded it, so. You know.
Sorry?
It's definitely blown in now, yeah.
Yeah, so that was a double bluff.
All of that, the leaflets for the talk, everything.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
I was still under the radar. We're still under the radar. Whatever radar counts, we're under it. I think. Yeah. Yeah. Questions from far away.
Hello. Sorry, I was just trying to compose my question in my head before I had the microphone. What I'm roughly thinking about now is how this set of beliefs, this set of ideas that you have at the moment, fits into a broader historical context, and also how it relates to other belief systems. I mean, the fact that we're talking about these ideas now must have some significance and some relationship to scientific materialism and the dominant narrative, and I'm just wondering how it all fits in and why we're coming to these ideas and why people are often looking for belief systems now. I feel like probably a lot of people that are here looking for some kind of belief system. So that was a bit of a loose question, but yeah, thanks.
Well, historically, I mean, some of this goes back a long way. People have always been asking these questions about the nature of reality. We talked about, actually, Bonnie brought up the idea of the Archons and the Gnostics, and I said, oh, well, it's a bit like this guy Elon Musk, who thinks we're living in this kind of matrix, and there's these kind of higher order entities, aliens or whatever, that are kind of controlling us and keeping us in this kind of blinkered reality. So some of it is kind of time immemorial, but I think what you said about it being a response to kind of materialism, scientific reductionism and all the rest of it, I think very much so. I mean, I think it's a kind of tired paradigm which most people find inherently dissatisfactory. It's kind of a bit of a worn trope. It's kind of useful to a point, but it's kind of looking a bit exhausted now, I think. So we are looking for alternative belief systems, I think, but it's not. That's just in the kind of the Western developed, whatever you want to call it, world in a way, because there are so many other alternative belief systems out there and reality tunnels. If you go and see, as I did, the Borradica in Mexico, and you step into just going into their town, you enter into their belief system, and it's absolutely tangible, as much as going to a supermarket is a tangible reality bubble for us. You go there and you close your eyes and you will see their deities and their kind of cosmology without even having to eat any peyote, for instance. When you do eat the peyote, you get exactly the same thing, but you're just entering into their reality, in a way, which in itself has its own power and form, in a way in which our reality bubble has, but we're completely unaware of it because we're inside it. I don't know if that helps, but I think there are alternative beliefs already out there, but we're trying to break out of ours in a way.
And also there's also an inherent desire for solution. There is this belief, there's a kind of tendency, there's a kind of yearning for the idea that there is a solution. There's going to be a way out, which is interesting because the moment you're trying to seek a solution, you're actually fixating the problem. So you're actually, you're creating the problem, and in a way there is no solution. There is an ever-evolving, ever-iridescent kind of mystery, which is, explodes on your face. It's, you're not gonna just get out of it. You're just gonna get bam, 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 all these things coming to you all the time.
It's turtles all the way down.
Sorry?
It's turtles all the way down.
Absolutely, yes.
Because I do work in academia. I wouldn't say I'm an academic, but I do work in that sort of industry. What I find about sort of scientific materialism is that, in a way, it's the most prey to the infiltration by sort of, toxic entities, because it doesn't believe in them. So everything's a metaphor in a world where even a metaphor is a dead thing. So there's this weird sort of like blindness that happens in even the best sort of academic, efforts, where and just scientism in general is like the ultimate, it's like the belief system that doesn't even realise it's a belief system, you know, and it doesn't believe in belief and doesn't even acknowledge belief, and you know, and you see the most demonic forces sort of driving it and taking it over and controlling it. It's like someone asleep at the wheel, and like anyone can kind of grab that wheel and take it, that because it doesn't even believe in that that's possible. We've seen it. We sometimes go to the Skeptics Society. Gary, friend over there, for fun we go to the Skeptics Society psychology Tuesday evenings at Goldsmiths, which is basically a sort of theatre of debunking. And you know, what you can see is a lot of psychic toxicity kind of flying around in the room, you know, whilst people are sort of going, there's no such thing as invisible forces, right? You know, and it's kind of comedic actually. So yeah, scientism, the belief system that doesn't kind of acknowledge itself as such, is the potential for disaster there is kind of obvious, I think. You know what I mean?
That's a question here.
Over here? Who's
this guy has a
over here?
question.
Hi, I'm going to try not to waffle, but I was thinking about the philosopher Catherine Malibu gave a talk recently. She's talking about the Blue Brain Project. Like you brought up the mapping of the human brain, and this kind of, I was thinking of Korzybski and the map is not the territory. And I guess I was just wondering what you think about, although there might be a sort of functional flaw in the sort of empirical mapping of the human brain, the goal is towards a superseding of that structure as advisable to AI technology. And once that's set in motion, the consciousness that will occur, seemingly inevitably, will be arguably more complex than our own, and be able to link in with this kind of, this morphic kind of flow of intelligence. And I guess I just wonder whether, my problem, and I think Catherine Malibu's problem, was sort of this problem of ontology and agency of the human, the function of philosophy, if there was one, coming from her platform of neuroplasticity and the sort of the fluidity of the brain, the adaptability of the brain, and that her conclusion was that was sort of moot in terms of the potentialities of AI, given this like new mapped territory that goes beyond that. So I guess I'm just wondering what your thoughts about whether, I don't know if that's a truth, but if that were to occur, do you speculate there could be a kind of dialogue of consciousness, a dialogue of intelligence, or will it fit into possibly a platform of, that kind of goal of breaking through to some other sphere that we don't possibly have access to?
Thanks, Jerry. Well, go on.
No, it's an easy one.
Go on.
The dialogue is already happening all the time, because there is the premise is as usually a little bit retarded. I mean, there is no such a thing as a mind or a brain. There is a mind and a brain in different states, in different contexts, which are physical, somatic contexts, and there are also consciousness contexts. So the mind under the effect of LSD is different than the mind as I'm speaking to you now. The mind under the effect of this is different. The mind as it turns in the dervish turning is a different mind. The mind in meditation is a different mind. So the idea that, again, there's a kind of, penis envy of science. It wants to externalize it into something that is made of metal, is glistening, it's a fetish, it's an idol. It's like, it's like a a big window in a church, like, ooh, it's here, like, God is present. But, you know, there is already an interdialogue between the mind happening to constantly change and be different minds. So there's a heterogeneity inherent in reality. And their desire to break through this is their blindness in seeing that actually the breakthrough is happening all the time, everywhere. I mean, a frog has a different mind than mine. It's not just it processes information differently, it's a different state of consciousness. A cat is a different state of consciousness. A goat, that's why, you know, ancient people had sex with goats or bulls. Because if you have sex with somebody, you need to conjoin your conscience with them, beside conjoining your genitals. If you conjoin with a goat or a bull, you need to enter the bull consciousness. So you are creating a different program, a different mind, a different reality. So you have done what they are trying to do by spending billions with something that actually can be achieved pretty quickly, if you have the guts for it, I guess. Not maybe for everybody, but it can go that way.
Sex with goats or AI? It's a choice.
It's a choice.
So we should have sex with the AI, basically.
Sorry? That's my take.
Could I then ask you, since you mentioned the possibility to access these other states, what outside of fucking a goat do you see as a possibility to shift consciousness? Yeah, or enter into another creature's consciousness outside of a sexual act.
Firstly, you need the belief and the will that it's possible.
Yeah.
And once you've entered that belief, I am really into like belief as a survival tool, you know, and that's a skill that, you know, it's like a lost skill that you can, you know, enter and leave at will, sort of realms of possibility, you know, as and when you need to. And that's called flexibility of mind. So once you get that idea, then Bob's your uncle. you know, and but most of our sort of education systems and are basically literally geared to shutting down that right from the start. So they're all systems of shutting down even that moment of believing it's possible. So that's what we're dealing with. So I say pull your children out of school, you know, anyway. But yeah, think as artists and scientists and practitioners, just the idea of inventing, like rewriting the script generally, and the fun that can be had with it, and the confidence as well. It's a confidence trick, because all of that, machines and money and all of that, that's all a mind fuck and all a mind game, and all just kind of metaphors, bloated metaphors. And so I'm not really afraid of those machines, because it doesn't matter how as stupid as I am still more intelligent than those machines, because I am infinite. And so I just think it's about levels of awakening to what's possible. That is what I think is worth researching and practicing and exploring, you know. So whatever way you can imagine to do it, I would say is what art can be, and science. So does that answer the question? Linda?
I guess it just because...
Please wait, sorry.
Okay. This is a very tiny thing, but it's not actually, but it's a short thing, which is, I guess it feels important because you're using these words like enter into, and when you were talking about sex with goats, it sounded to me like you were talking particularly about like penetrating, and you're talking about like entering into someone's consciousness, which is very like, I'm going to do this thing, and kind of surely like a radical openness is more useful and more interesting. And a lot of that idea of like, how do I enter into someone else's consciousness is also based around like very straightforward heterosexual abusive practices as well. So like, maybe it's about positioning that idea of self as something
that is semantically
different.
prejudicial, isn't it? The way to say entering into. Yeah.
Maybe the goat doesn't like you.
No, but I was talking about just entering communication. No, I was thinking about entering communication with the goat. I didn't say entering the goat. It doesn't need to be. Now, the word entering is laden, and we can go on about the ladenness of that word, of course. But you can kiss the goat, you can look at the goat in the eyes. I'm saying, what I mean to this is like establishing a connection, a meaningful connection. You know what I mean? Or entering a mushroom, which means the mushroom enters you. You know what I mean? That's the only reason why I use the word entering. Two things enter. You know.
A good example of that, and we ran some experiments with LSD, going back to this guy's point about alternative ways of kind of melding with other species, and one of our scientists, zoologist, botanist, biologist, had the experience, been working on the symbiotic relationship of plants and fungi, and had the experience of what it was like to be the fungi, in this case penetrating the rootstock of a plant as it kind of grows inside it, which was kind of what his research was based on. So, whatever gets you there, really, and however that takes form.
And also, if you're a vapor, entering is a slightly different kind of entering.
Yes.
It's a co-entering, but it's still an entering, entering is a nice way to do it. Because if you've done any sort of, I think this interspecies thing is really important to explore, and deep observation is one way, especially water-based things. It's a lot easier to just intentionally enter into a sort of like deep observation state with a plant or animal, and you can learn from their qualities and their behaviours and their consciousness. You can learn, and you can get new tools and new knowledge, and for your journey kind of thing. That's got to be some vaporous thing that's happening. But
so you could say touching,
entering,
I guess, or dialoguing or whatever. That wasn't meant specifically in a kind of penetrative sense. It's elevated, it's laden as a term, of course.
I guess I just think that. For me, one of the ways that if you want to kind of reach those expanded states, that actually exiting that parameter of like taking and giving or penetrating and being penetrated, which is a huge kind of way that language and people work.
True.
I think you have to get out of that.
True.
And so you have to like escape heterosexuality.
But you can also, I'm just saying, you can also escape heterosexuality as a premise, whereby you already neutralize that entering is specifically heterosexual. You can just see entering as, ingestion, which is a fundamental mechanism for altering consciousness. I mean, we ingest food, we ingest air, we ingest energy, not just, psychedelics so it's a kind of putting something inside you. There's not just one way to put things inside you. There are many ways to put things inside you, you know what I mean? Even touching, if you touch a psychedelic goat, I'm not saying, clearly something Freudian is going on. If you touch one of the psychedelic toads, you're touching and you're getting that thing. This is going to go down. You tricked me into this.
What about riding? Is that bad? What, horse riding? Riding, yeah. I mean, I like the ride. I'll ride anything.
Let's open that to debate, shall we?
About relationships with horses in that way around.
Yeah. Riding, Francis Crick riding on the side, riding along the DNA. Riding's a good one. Riding the wave, I think riding's quite an open, dynamic way to sort of, interact with information. Yeah.
That's the metaphor they use in possession, isn't it? In transpossession cults, being ridden. They say when you get possessed, you get ridden by the spirits. Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah.
We've run out of time, Bonnie.
What?
I think we've run out of time.
Okay.
Are we?
Right.
Damn it.
Thank you.
Survive.